The floor is open. Any questions, comments? Yes, please. There is a microphone there if you... And please give us your name and institutional affiliation.
I'm Esther Aranda. I work with URS, a consulting firm in engineering and planning. And I'm in disaster risk reduction. I'm a planner by training, so this was very fascinating. Thank you, everybody. But I have a question for the ORISA plan. In setting up a separate organization to monitor, can you tell us a little bit about how successful the disaster management one has been? Because one of the criticisms I've heard about, implementing climate change adaptation in a cell or a different agency or one agency that doesn't really have responsibility over the others, nobody wants to comply. So how, in the disaster one, do you get everybody to report and do whatever they're supposed to do? Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps we can take 2 or 3 more questions. Somebody else? Please, please. So then you have time to think about it.
This will be a question for Mr. Beera. In your jurisdiction, if I remember correctly, it has like 36 million people or something to that effect. When you had the opportunity for feedback, from about how many different people did you have feedback from?
Okay. Perhaps we can start.
Okay. Regarding the Disaster Management Authority, Orissa Disaster Management Authority, we had a very devastating cyclone in the year 1999. So after that, again with the help of World Bank, we set up this Orissa State Disaster Management Authority. In fact, World Bank funded most of its activities, and this was a central authority wherein the Chief Minister himself is the chairman of the authority, and Chief Secretary is the working chairman, and you have a Chief Executive, a senior officer is the Chief Executive. Then there are representation from various departments. So what happens is, this is basically the nodal agency, but different departments take up the execution of different projects. So because of the very high level of involvement at the senior, the chairman being the Chief Minister himself, you could get support from all the departments in this, and this has been a very successful model in the states. Almost all the states in India have now imitated this model, including so much so that the National Disaster Management Authority followed up from here. So this has been very successful, and here also what we plan to do is, we will have this climate change authority, but it will not take up all the activities. Like some of the interdepartmental programs will be monitored through this, whereas and interdepartmental funding requirements will be routed through this, whereas individual departments, say water area or say energy area, they will themselves also prepare their action plans and access funds directly. So it's not that these will be totally doing it centrally, but they also individual departments will also have independence. Now coming to the number of responses, we got about 150 responses from various people. But besides the meetings kind of consultation, like rooms like this, we had some of that, but through the web we got about 150 responses.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Peter.
Thank you very much indeed to the panel for some very stimulating presentations. I'd like to put a question, in fact, to each of the panel members. You're representing some very diverse environments, some very diverse economic conditions, from expansion of Canada's north, enormous opportunity for opening the resources of the Arctic, Indonesia rapidly expanding, Mexico likewise, and Orissa giving us a very, very clear indication of growth expectations. You're all working in the area of climate change adaptation. So my question is very simply, how confident are you that the methods that each of you has been looking at are going to deliver against our keynote address speakers' statements about the scale of the problem that we've got? In other words, I'm looking really to ask you the question, how confident are you that the approaches we're currently developing are going far enough? What would you do to try and accelerate the process still further? Thank you.
Perhaps could I add to that question? In the other presentations, not that from Orisa, it was mentioned that the low-hanging fruits, the no-regrets options were identified as priorities for action, which in itself, it's very useful. It indicates a way, and a way that everybody will agree. My question that I think builds on what you say, Peter, is after these options are exhausted or are done, what is being thought in terms of the plans and processes that you've been working on in order to move forward to address this long-term challenge?
The thing that gives me confidence that in the North, Canada will probably do fairly well is that one of the major pieces they've been working on is governance. And I think you heard a young lady this morning in the auditorium express her views on just what the degree of change in the North. And I think in Canada's North today, there really isn't any question of the magnitude of the change and the fact that it has to be dealt with. There are questions. This is just, in some ways, the Baffinland terms of reference that I put forward are the most innovative that I've seen probably in the world. I don't think I've seen a terms of reference that is trying to grapple with climate change on the level that it is with the size of project that it is. That project may not go ahead. It may not happen. The EA may not happen. But I guarantee you other projects will. And so it's a very positive sign that this is forward. It's I think all the factors coming together, which include the sovereignty issues and the other issues around the North, which force Canada to take a major role in what they're doing.
Thanks. I mean, it's clearly a good question. Are we doing the right things? Do they have an impact? We like to, I'm sure, hope that the answer is yes to that, since we're dedicating lots of time and energy. I would say that the Mexico work, I felt quite confident that it was contributing to improving the situation on the ground. I think that it's a process, right? And I think that by getting people to understand what is happening and thinking about how to work together to start prioritizing actions around climate change, you are definitely improving. You're improving the situation as best as can be done. I think that it is a process, and like one of the major things that I come away from the Mexico work is recognizing that you have to build the capacity, you have to put sort of institutions and mechanisms in place where you have champions in government and outside of government who understand what's happening and have start to work on it, because it is a process. It's not like you can put a plan in place and that's it, right? I mean, we know that never works, and it clearly won't work where something where the understanding of the situation is changing every day. So yes, I think it was a good start. No, I don't think it's enough. But I think something also to think about is this issue of the no regrets. I mean, that's a place to start, right? I mean, under any circumstances, that's where you start. And it makes sense today, whether you believe in climate change or not. If you can start improving efficiencies in the way that natural resources are used, clearly that is an improvement over the status quo. And then the next phase, once, then you move into these sort of climate justified, right? Do you start sort of selecting for varieties of crops that make sense under drier, conditions, et cetera. And so I think you have to see it as a moving target, and that we need to be, supporting building capacity and bringing the knowledge down to the people who are dealing with it, because they are dealing with it, right? It's not a when, right? So.
Well, in terms of the country environmental analysis, and specifically for the Indonesia, it was a long process that started in December or in February 2007. So it went through a scoping issue, and it definitely generated dialogue and led to a dialogue on climate change and its link to poverty and to growth in Indonesia. So the results that came out, it wasn't specifically due to the CA, but it's also the process itself. And like others have mentioned, this is a start, and there are already some results that were felt as the CA was progressing, but yeah, it will need to continue.
We have actually, when we prepared our action plan, as I told, we have tried to put some numbers, like the amount of money that will be required for implementing the plan. Our requirement of money is something like $4 billion US dollars kind of thing. And we are able to, about 50% of it are in sight from our state resources and national resources. And balance about $2.5 billion will be possibly, again through Government of India, will be going for some multilateral aid. And it all depends on how much funds we access. And entire action plan will be a reality only if all the funds are available. But nevertheless, we are planning to achieve it. And second thing is that, as our friend from Mexico was saying, this evolving process. So we learn from whatever we do. Maybe after 2 years, we'll be changing some of our priorities and we'll be taking up certain other actions. So this will be an evolving process.
From the bank perspective, one of the things that I would like to point out was that we didn't want this to be a bank-driven process. We wanted this to be driven by the state. So our engagement was more in terms of providing support whenever they needed, bringing in the expertise whenever they needed. But the process was driven by the state. That's important to note. Secondly, we followed the SCA approach, and basically the idea was to mainstream climate change in policies, programs, and plans, and that was very clear, ongoing or forthcoming policies, plans, and programs. Thirdly, we did not want to waste any time in fancy modeling, trying to predict what's going to happen in 2030, 2050, or 2100, because we realized that the people, the coastal communities are already suffering, the farmers know what's going on in agriculture, and so on. So really, we thought that the bottom-up approach was better suited in the OSA context, as opposed to taking time, doing fancy modeling, coming up with vulnerability assessment, and then going from there. Finally, Odisha is at kind of development crossroads at this point. So the question is, which direction it will take? And we thought that in order to move towards a more sustainable development path, but as Mr. Behra mentioned, Odisha is rich in mineral resources, but all the mineral resources are under forest areas, and all forest areas are inhabited with indigenous people or tribal people. So clearly it's a potentially, it's a grave situation where if you want to tap mineral resources, you have to cut down forests and drive indigenous people away from those areas. But then what the climate change action plan provided was a hook to bring all the stakeholders together on one table. For example, in one of the working groups, for the first time, the mining people and the forestry people were in the same working group. And the first time they were actually sitting across one table and talking to each other. So that's what I think climate change plan was quite successful in terms of bringing all the players together. Yeah.
We have time for a second round of questions, so please feel free. The microphones are in the aisle.